Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another edition of EduSmart's Professional Development Series. My name is Devanshi Mathur, and I will be monitoring the chat today. We have a jam-packed session. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker of the hour, Paula No. Paula No is our fan favorite over here. She is our experienced consultant who works with educational tech companies, regional service centers, districts, and campuses, focusing in the areas of user interfacing and user experience, instructional coaching, and innovative professional development aligned to best practices. In her 21 years plus of education, she has served with the district's Associate Superintendent's Office as the instructional leader tasked with improving teacher and administrator effectiveness. She's also served as a curriculum writer and professional development presenter. She has a wonderful session for you planned today, so please give your warmest welcome to the one, the only Paula No.
Devanshi, thank you so much for that introduction. I need to tape that and listen to that first thing in the morning, right? The power, welcome to your day. So welcome everybody to this session of Star Prep Workshop. As we are entering into the season, you can feel it. You're exhausted, you're tired. You're tired of it. They're tired of it, but we are so thrilled to be here with you today to hopefully give you a few extra tools to put in your tool belt as you get closer to approaching this Star Prep season. And so without further ado, let's get started. So we can't get started with Star Prep unless we go to Vegas. And guess who's already there? That's right, Tom Jones. It's not unusual that you would hear Tom Jones sing this song in Vegas, and it's not unusual that we pay attention to data. As science teachers, we're very familiar with what our TEKs say and how often they're tested. So I highly recommend that you visit this #1 free website called leadforward.com. It not only gives you a quick breakdown of all your readiness and supporting standards, but it also gives you a testing frequency. That's right, STAR tells you how many questions you can expect on the STAR test based on the cheek number. So it's a great roadmap to look at and to follow as you move forward with your pacing. So after you visit Lead Forward, and you look under the resource tab, you will also notice that it groups these testable questions by clusters and subclusters. And so please pay careful attention to this. We always say in Texas, life happens. Well, life really happens right now. And on the STAR test in 5th grade, life and earth happen a little over 60%. So pay careful attention when you are compiling water cycle, some questions over weather, climate, maybe earth questions and life. It makes a huge chunk of your test. So you can expect 36 questions. Please feel free to look at this document. You can pull it up on your own time, but I wanted you to pay careful attention to this subcluster. It is called Organisms and Environment. 5 questions were tested last year on that TEK alone, or that combination of TEKs, I should say. And those TEKs involve living to living relationships and living to non-living relationships. So make sure you pay careful attention to that. And then you might also look on this page and you see an NT. That means it's not tested. So if I'm looking at weather, for instance, out of the last 4 years, it's not been tested. So that would instantly help you manage your time as you move into STAR review season. Now let's pay careful attention to a suggested plan that I've created for you. This is called a data responsive instruction plan. And what do I mean by that? I mean that in order to have a data responsive instruction plan, you will need to drill down to the level of success that your kids can have per standard. And so that also means that you wouldn't just initiate a level 1 or a low level question to ensure that they have mastered that information. You would want to make sure that you test and assess it at least at a level 3 or 4 to make sure that they can handle the rigor of any question thrown at them. Number 2, better is always better. Try to make sure that you touch base with visuals and open-ended questions to start your review, because you can find out exactly the wealth of content connections that your kids can display once they have to interact with an open-ended question versus a multiple choice question. Number 3, make sure you norm with a very aggressive high-level question, a level 4 question, and then you can always scaffold down and help kids build back up to that with support instead of starting with a very low-level question. Keep all content alive, and every space in STAR season becomes a science space. What do I mean by that? When your kids are transitioning, let's say to specials or to lunch or to wow time, that would be a great time for an open-ended question on planets, on weather climate, on characteristics of sun, earth, moon, maybe practicing shadow patterns. All these things that require an enormous amount of practice, or could simply be a card sorting situation or a visual literacy practice situation, can be practiced while we're lining up to transition in just a few seconds. So keep in mind that all spaces in the building, anywhere our kids go, can be open game for a science space. Next, I know you've been waiting to hear about what a suggested plan could look like. And so here is a suggested 10-day plan for 5th grade. Now, this is based on a 1 hour of instruction. And I know many of you have more than an hour. So I would say if you have more than an hour, please feel free to utilize that time, really moving from that 3D to 2D and using rich 2D practice or gaming. And so if I'm going to break up our time into a 10-day format, I'm really going to load it heavy with life. Why? Because a solid third of the questions are found on life science. So it's hugely important that we master it. In a lot of districts, they haven't taught life science yet according to their pacing model. And so if you haven't taught it and you know that it's one of the most tested strands, it's super important that you spend time, you emphasize it, and that kids feel solid and confident as they go into this strand, into STAR. So I've denoted 4 days just for life science, 1 day for rotation and shadow patterns, 1 day for the formation of sedimentary rock to include renewable and non-renewable and fossils, 1 day on Earth slow change, and then I would mention rapid change somewhere in time from thin air in the building. Time from thin air means is that it doesn't happen during my instructional time. It would be transition time. I would also spend 1 day on energy, forms of energy, mechanical, electrical, light, thermal, sound. But during that time, I would focus the majority of my time on light, because I think that is the most rigorous part of the forms of energy. Next, 1 day on mixtures and solutions, and then starting off with matter properties with a heavy dose of charts. And I'll go into some key components of this plan a little later on. So what could the 1 hour look like? Well, this is what I would suggest, is that you always start off with a hook or some sort of visual support. So approximately 5 minutes, and then I would tie that hook visual support into a POD. And I would probably use a rigorous STAR release question, or I would use a STAR Smart question coming from EduSmart. And so we'll touch on that a little bit later. After that, I would spend 10 minutes on a rigorous vocabulary practice that's very interactive. And I'll give you some examples a little bit later on. About 15 minutes of a core teach or a reteach, and then 30 minutes on 2D practice. So sometimes I get questions from teachers. Why should we practice so long with 2D questions? And my answer is simply this. It doesn't matter how much hands-on science you've had. If you simply don't practice helping kids transition that wonderful 3D experience that you've provided for them into a flat 2D experience, some students struggle to make the transition. And so I think that is a very intentional and deliberate practice on our part as educators to make sure that we set our kids up for success. So don't forget to tie that bow on top of that present right at the end of your lesson with that good 3D to 2D practice. So let's talk about vocabulary. What do I mean about a rich vocabulary experience? Directly, explicitly practicing the key words, using visual support as much as we can with the words, making sure that all science words stay alive. No matter if I'm talking about earth science, if the water cycle is present inside the story, I want to make sure that I address the water cycle steps in real time as we're reviewing that particular piece of maybe slow change to the Earth's surface. And then I always look to make word connections. Okay, so Devanshi, do we have somebody on the call? I need a volunteer. So would anybody like to volunteer to play a very easy game with me?
Ooh, let's see. Anyone to unmute and volunteer? Or you can be voluntold. See how your students like it.
Very nice.
Going once, going twice.
All right.
Oh, well, would you look here? Mr. Todd Watney, I'm asking you to unmute. Are you ready?
Todd.
Bring it on. Let's go.
Okay, Todd, let's hear it. We're gonna check your science vocabulary expertise. So word pop simply means I'm going to give you a word and I want you to give me the one word definition or the one word answer to my word. So you give me a word to my word. You got the word? He's got the word. Okay, the first word is going to be the bouncing of light. Do you know what that is, Todd?
Reflection.
Hey, very good. And so what if I say bend? What would you say?
Refraction.
Right. What if I said thermal energy? What one word goes with thermal energy?
Nuclear.
Heat. Okay, very good.
Heat.
5th grade, no problem. And what does salt do in water?
Dissolve.
Hey, bingo. So that is a quick, thank you, Todd. So that is a quick way that we
can I get some applause in the audience?
I did,
please?
A round of applause.
I mean, like, I want to see them up in the chat.
Woo! Okay. So another way that you can practice vocabulary is a quick game called Frame It and Name It. So here's an image that I picked. And when we put images in front of kids, as we know on STAR test, it's about 67% of the questions have images or charts or both. Those are clues, right? For especially our struggling scholars. But those are clues that we need our kids to engage with. So when I put this clue in front of you, I need our children to be able to frame this picture based on a teak. And so it would be frame it and name it. So naming it would be the very specific name of this image. So framing it would be light energy, and naming it would be reflection. So you can see how easy it would be to practice images with your kids. And so why is this important? Well, for 3 reasons. It gets kids more engaged to using the aids that are provided to them on the questions. Number 2, it makes all questioning much more engaging. And number 3, it's a good way to connect the words to the images to the story. Super important. So I call that frame it and name it. So whatever your routine is, make sure that you have one and it's happening on a daily basis. Here's another quick game I call Mile a Minute. You may be familiar with this. This simply would be a word vocabulary game where one partner has their back to the screen and the other partner is facing the screen. The person facing the screen is giving all kinds of sentences and descriptors, trying to get their partner to guess this vocabulary word. And so we would have 2 games. The first game would be played with the words on the left, delta all the way down to condensation. And so the first team to get this right would be the winners. And then the next game, we would switch places. And so the next game would be solid, erosion, metal, oil, and producer. So another really fun way to practice vocabulary that doesn't involve a bubble or a pencil, that gets kids up, it gets them moving, it gets them talking, definitely laughing. And I highly suggest you create a leaderboard with most of these games, because you can play them multiple times, and kids that may start off a little slow will quickly get up to speed on how to describe these vocabulary words in real time. So here's another way to practice your key vocabulary words with visuals, would be to go onto Google Image and simply grab some visuals, put them on a slide, and practice with your scholars at the beginning of a lesson or the beginning of a small group. And so these are very key vocabulary words that we would need to focus on in 5th grade, that I need students to be able to frame and name. So we can practice 2 games with one. Right here on the top left, if I'm framing that, I would say slow change or landform, and the name would be delta. So if I'm practicing the image in the middle, the frame would be water cycle, the name could be condensation, or the frame could be state change as well, with the name gas to a liquid. So I'll move on, but another good way to pair a couple of these vocabulary games. Next, Word Explorer. This is a product inside of EduSmart that pieces things that I've just shared with you how to piece together. EduSmart has gone ahead and done that for you on every single TEK, including the supporting standards for you for 5th grade. The Word Explorer shows you an image, it gives you a definition, and then it gives you some sort of formative assessment task for your students to be able to handle, practice, and work making connections between these words and the definition, and then it puts it into context for practice. It is a fantastic way to hold kids accountable for their learning. While it can be independent, it can be done small group, whole group, but also data can be collected from this. So very, very impressive. A component of EduSmart is called Word Explorer. In real time, I think that you would notice that there was one thing that I left off my plan, and that was explicit circuit practice. And I left it off, but I didn't leave it off. So it was during forms of energy when you would revisit this, but this particular TEK needs a lot more practice than just a few minutes in one session. And so I like to practice reviewing circuits all throughout as a brain break. So I want you to take a careful look at this complete circuit. Or is it complete? Is it closed or open? Would be synonyms for complete and incomplete. We're going to stick with closed and open, but I'm going to ask this question and I want somebody to answer it in the chat. Let's see what you know. How many devices are on? 2 questions. That's the first question. How many devices are on? The second question, what do I need to do in order to turn on the yellow, the blue, and the buzzer only? What do I need to do to turn on the yellow, the blue, and the buzzer only? So I'm going to let Devanshi look at that chat, and I'm going to continue on. Circuit questions, phenomenal brain breaks. So let's continue on. So how does your anchor or visual literacy look different today than when you first taught it? So obviously your kids know a lot more about water cycle now after you've taught it. So when you review it, make sure that you pull out a more rigorous anchor or visual image to describe the learning in place. Don't just dance with the one that brung you initially, right here, which is a very basic visual of a water cycle that I'm sure all of our kids have in their journal. So make sure you're applying these lab investigations, creating visuals from them or finding them. A great place to find visuals for lab investigations, you got it, is EduSmart. So whether by viewing or participating inside the lab investigations, you can also trim pictures and put them inside your lesson pieces for this quick and easy engagement for kiddos. So anytime you're talking about your anchors, you want to talk about leveling up the rigor as we approach STAR. So I always like to use charts and rigorous imaging. So the image here on the bottom is very much about an 8th grade TEK, not so much about a 5th grade TEK when it comes to heat. But wait a second, this particular questioning is on conductors and insulators. So look carefully at what the questions are asking. So my chart above is charting conductors and insulators. And keep in mind that good insulators are very bad conductors, and good conductors are very bad insulators. So that would be something that specifically needs to be taught, that kids tend to struggle with across the board, but specifically with thermal energy. And so the best way to show them this relationship is with a pan and a plastic handle or a metal handle. Moving forward, we've spent a lot of time so far talking about matter. Make sure that you reinforce the bottom part of this particular standard, which is density, magnetism, state, conductor, insulator, thermal, electrical, and of course, last but not least, solubility. So solubility really comes with practice, practice, practice. Kids need to see visuals. They need to see lab demonstrations, videos over labs demonstrations, and quick teacher demos tied to the key vocabulary. And then they need to practice in real time. The best way I know to practice at this point in the year is to put unknowns in front of them that have similar qualities and have them categorize what this unknown is going to do based on a demonstration. And so a lot of our kids won't know what gelatin is. So open up a pack, pour it into some hot water and stir, and then let kids come to the conclusion of which category that they would put gelatin in, and that they would be able to take me to the next level and tell me, is it soluble or is it not soluble? And if it is soluble, then it makes a solution. So here's another good activity, sorting words based on physical properties. That's actually what the TEK says that the students need to be able to do. Please focus on these 3 properties: density, conductor, and magnetism. A lot of our students will get objects confused when it comes to whether it conducts energy and whether it is magnetic. Okay, so spend some extra time being very visual in your reteach and review, and always chart your results. Switching gears back to mixtures and solutions. This is actually a picture of a very good lab investigation inside of EduSmart, where the kids actually get to do this simulation. Basically, it's an online simulation that the kids perform. This is a wonderful assignment that you can make to a student and then bring them over to small group and go over their data pieces with them and have them explain why they got the results that they did based on the property of solubility. So keep in mind that there's differences between mixtures and solutions, and there they are. And then my key tip for you and your kids is to play this game called Name It and Work the Box. This is a very difficult chart if you don't have a complete understanding on what you're looking for with solutions. And so there is specifically a way to teach solutions to children where they get it and then they really won't make mistakes on it ever again. So when you're mixing things into water and stirring or shaking, we never want to make the conclusion on whether or not it's a solution until the very end, until the objects settle in the water. And so if your kids see that the frame on this is definitely a solubility question, I can see that I'm pouring substances in, I make observations before and after stirring. Well, I already know that solubility and I know what I'm looking for. I have to wait until I've done the investigation. I need to wait for it to settle and then I make my observations. And I need to look at the verbs. So the verbs on this are settled. Well, if it settles, it obviously is not spread evenly. And so that would be a mixture word. If it's clear and has no visible particles, that would be a solution word. If it's collecting, that means that it is not dissolved. So if it's collecting, it's gathering somewhere. So that would be the same thing as settling, and forming would be the same as the two above it. Okay. So settled, collected, and formed would all go into the mixture only. So once you frame it like that and work the box, it gives the kids a schema in order to process these questions. So Devanshi, I'm going to pause there and handle any questions. I know Lisa might have a question for me.
We actually do have some questions for you.
Perfect.
Can you take two real quick?
Two is great. Yes.
Perfect. So our first question is from Hermelinda. In EduSmart, can you run reports based on standards? From what you're talking about, it was in reference to one of the examples you'd given. They wanted to learn more about how EduSmart, if you could run reports based off of these standards.
Well, we all know that data responsive instruction is hugely important. And we know that we need to make sure that we're in a place to understand and to be able to prescribe or assign material based on where the student's at. And so EduSmart firmly believes in that mantra and in that process. And so thoroughly throughout EduSmart, you can pull reports based on standards. And it doesn't just give you information, basic information on how the student did on that standard. It will tell you also time spent. It will tell you the amount of answers that were incorrect. And so you can really diagnose it all the way back to your teaching, or you can distill it all the way down to the student level. EduSmart also has a product called StarSmart, and I'll talk about that at the very end. But if you own that particular product inside of EduSmart, you get 2 STAR released tests that they've created that are 36 questions each. You get 1 20-question assessment over each reporting category, and then you get a 5-question assessment over every standard. And so you can imagine how data responsive you can be inside of that formula. So if you issued the STAR practice test to get a plumb line on where your kids are, then you can look at the data and you can see how they did per standard with the item analysis. And then you can go into EduSmart and assign work for the children to reinforce their learning based on that standard that they were low in. So very much data responsive for EduSmart. Good question.
And that leads wonderfully into the next question we've received. You've spoken about STAR and TEACS. Can you speak to how that would relate to Florida specific standards?
Absolutely. So when you look at the standards that are in Texas and in Florida, we have different names for our process standards, but in general, the content is the same. And so when you look for rich content, obviously we have matter, we have physical properties of matter, mixtures and solutions. So if you go into EduSmart is aligned to the Texas standards, but it's also aligned to the Florida standards. Okay, we're very much present in the state of Florida, just as we are in the state of Texas. So the teacher doesn't have to go in and figure out what applies to them. They can simply use the product that is built for Florida and for the Florida standards.
Can I add to that, please?
Please, yes.
Florida, thank you very much for that excellent explanation. Florida, for the SSA practice test, both 5th and 8th grade, there are 2 practice tests for each grade level, and the Bio EOC practice test offers an item analysis report based on body of knowledge, big ideas, and the units, which are standards, a combination of standards. The item analysis for the quizzes are coming, will be going live shortly. So those will be available as well. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
And those are all our questions. Thank you, Paula.
Perfect. So if I was a teacher, I would think, oh my goodness, we need another brain break. Let's pop up and let's do some circuit practice challenge. So you notice that I put another practice reading the circuit question up, and I do it in an open-ended format. So teachers could completely change the questions without having to change the visual. So that would be another good point for a circuit practice question. As we move forward to light, so keep in mind that when you're teaching light, what's its name? Its name is ray. How does it travel in a straight line? And the three ways it behaves: it refracts, it reflects, or it is stopped or absorbed or blocked. What is a medium, and what medium can I expect to see? Some keywords that go along with these action words: refraction and reflection. So keep in mind the mediums that we're talking about, whether it's water or whether it's a shiny surface such as a mirror, or quite tricky, the shiny surface of water. So make sure that you teach all the way to the depth and complexity. The best way to teach light is, you got it, with visuals. So name it and frame it. This would be light. Reflection, I always like to ask kids, how many birds do you see? It's interesting what they say. And then I'm just going to kind of scroll through here with different visuals that you can use whenever you see fit to help drive your practice with kiddos. The more practice means the more conversation. The more targeted conversation means the higher chance that you're going to get to the rigor and the complexity of what's being asked. So make sure you're utilizing your equipment to tell the story of what's happening inside of each particular topic. And for light, it's generally tested inside of equipment or with visuals. So moving on, experiments, think it through. So my key testing points for experiment is, tell me the story of the experiment. So put a bunch of experiments or experimental designs up in front of your kids and have them tell you the story of what's happening. And I always like to frame it for kids. And so a nice frame is, what would be a good title for this experiment? What variable am I testing? What's the one thing that's getting measured? And what tool or increment am I using to measure it? And then obviously we would look at this particular image of an experiment and we would ask these questions, paying careful attention to the one thing that obviously is changing. And so here would be another quick example. Okay, on to space, on to space. So I'm going to quickly ask some simple questions over some images. So how would you frame this particular image? Do you think these images are models of the sun, earth, moon, or identifying planets? Do you think these images are analyzing patterns? Or do you think these images are demonstrating day and night? And I use this all across the state in teacher trainings, and I generally get about a 50% correct answer to these questions. So they're not easy, but you can imagine students struggle with these as well. And it's good that we put unknown things in front of them so we can apply our knowledge at a very rigorous level. Okay, so this would be, the answer to this would be analyzing patterns. And that's what the crosshairs are for, because it's segmenting it out into quadrants and we're looking at the pattern of change. Okay, so next, here's a different image. Would this be a model of sun, earth, moon, analyzing patterns, or demonstrating day and night? So this would be another analyzing patterns based on how the shadow patterns are changing and how the sun is apparently moving across the horizon. Okay, next, no brainer right here. Everybody gets this one, the planets. What's the acronym? My very excellent mother just served us nachos. And then here we go, last but not least, is this a model of the sun, earth, moon? Is it planets? Is it patterns? Or is it day and night? So I like to think that it's a model. And in the TEKS, it specifically says for us to construct models. And it's not the teachers constructing the models, it's the students constructing the models. So that's a nice little way to practice simple concepts and get your head wrapped around how visuals can help drive instruction. And anytime I ask students to do something with a visual, I try to get some sort of a quick write out of them whether it's even 2 to 3 sentences. And when I do that, I always have a vocabulary list of words, up to 4 words that I want them to use in their quick write. And I want them to underline the word as they use it in their 2 to 3 sentences. And that ensures a high level of response. If I don't include tier 1 and tier 2 words, I often get very low level responses, and then I have to come back and ask them to raise up the level of their response. So I like to get in front of it by having that expectation that we're going to use high level of academic vocabulary. Next, just some images over space. This is definitely day and night. And then a very rigorous image that I simply put some letters on, A, B, C, D. This image came out of EduSmart, but it's tricky. And so if you know which way the Earth rotates, and if you read arrows on diagrams, this is going to help you. You notice that it's rotating counterclockwise. And so I would simply ask at a rigorous level, what letter represents sunrise? And so it's difficult if kids have not had to put words to that definition. So sunrise is when the horizon goes from dark to light. And so the answer choice would be A. That's the first point of sunrise. Okay, good example to use for your kids. So more and more visuals. So off to earth science. So earth science, I want to focus in on these particular standards. We've got rapid change, right? And we've got slow change. So rapid change, we're really focusing on representations of the earth quaking, volcanoes erupting, and land sliding due to gravity. Slow changes, we're looking with 3 sources: weathering, erosion, deposition by wind, water, ice, and then the landforms that form as the result of that. So the majority of our questions are going to come from these slow changes to the Earth's surface, which lead us up into the formation of a sedimentary rock. So here is one of my all-time favorite instructional modules in EduSmart, and it's water as a force. It uses a lot of high-functioning key vocabulary words, but I love teaching alongside of EduSmart because it makes our teaching come alive. So I'm hard-pressed to think that any teacher teaches this visually by going and capturing their own visuals, because it's a whole lot of work. And so I highly suggest that even though you're a master teacher, I think you can still up your game if you have EduSmart going alongside of you, and that you pause and impart your teaching and your strategies and your activities, and then hit play again, and then question the students inside the rich stories and visuals that are aligned to the depth of the standard. So here's a quick example, and then I'm going to move on. In this particular EduSmart model, it talked about water seeping into the crack. So not only are we working on word formation and word definitions, vocabulary as it relates to the content, we are working on building that vocabulary for all scholars. And so it's amazing what kids can do and can remember when we say a word and we tie it into a visual and a story. Really helps the vocabulary development move rather quickly. And so you notice we'll see landforms here, whether it's a valley or a glacier cutting a valley, whether it's a river carving a canyon, or sand dune forming based on wind deposition. Or here we have a delta from a top down, very, very rich visuals that move right into slow changes forming sedimentary rocks. Here would be another good chance for a brain break. And then we're off to life. So before I wrap up with life, Devanshi, do we have any questions? Or are you green lighting me to keep going?
You're good to go.
All right, so life happens. We talked about it. So here you go. Identify and describe how energy flows in food chains. So this would be a particular activity that I would put visuals to these descriptors. And so this would be a progression from 3rd to 4th to 5th, and a scaffold for our 5th grade students, especially that had to be taught science through COVID. We want to ensure that there were no gaps. And if there are gaps, we want to ensure that we specifically are teaching through and filling those gaps all the way up to the tested grade. So identify, predict, describe, more predicting and describing. So if we can't look at something and read it, we're not going to be successful. That's what that means. Identify, describe, and predict, because this is going to be a visual for us. And it's probably going to be a story and a visual or a chart. And so let's look at that a little carefully. So this would be an example of a very low level identify and describe. So if we focus on food chains and then we move into predicting how changes in food chains affect ecosystems, then we can move that all the way into a food web, because a food web is made of many food chains. And so when I look at some of the rich visuals and the rich interactivities that EduSmart provides, I think of how easy it is to take that by hitting pause, whole group, having kids pull out a whiteboard, and then I ask 2 or 3 rigorous questions over this particular draw a food web prompt. Okay, what happens if I remove the hair? How many consumers are eating the desert grass? Or what is the population going to do if I remove X? So asking high-level questions in a quick format makes a very easy formative assessment that I can quickly see where my kids are without me, the teacher, having to do hardly any of the heavy lifting. So here would be another example of some ecosystem impact that would be very easy to ask over this food web. And then remember, life science happens for us 1/3 of the time. Make sure that you make connections with 2 and 3 step questions. In Texas, we have to know our birds. I don't know about you guys, we don't teach much about birds but we test a lot about birds. And so that's kind of wrong, right? So we need to pay careful attention to feet and beaks, because they tell us a great story. Kids almost find this as trying to solve a mystery problem on what did the bird eat, or use the clues to solve the problem, right? And so I really enjoy watching them interact with some of these questions and investigations that we have them do regarding beaks and feet. And that leads itself all the way to some questioning and some questioning reminders. So anytime that you're looking to question your kids, don't forget about asking yourself this: how have I tested them in the past? Has it always been a word problem, or has it always been a picture? If I only ask them to draw a picture and to label it in the water cycle, what's a more rigorous way that I could ask that question? So maybe would it be by adding a chart? Maybe is it by adding text and a story to that graphic or a picture, and then asking questions? So make sure at this point in the year that you're really leveling up those questions and not just sticking with the basic word problems. And this is what I mean by that. Look at this question. Very simple, straightforward question in my mind, or in the adult's mind, but we struggled with this question. It's intimidating from a visual standpoint, but there's not a lot of words on it. So if I'm going to frame this, if I'm working with scholars and we look at this, and I see the sidewalk at 3 different times in the same day, and it was caused by the weather, I already know, I'm already thinking things. If it's caused by the weather, I'm thinking this is a water cycle question. And I go from dry, wet to dry. Okay. So we specifically have to make sure that we ensure that our kids know how to read time and that they know what time means. So 6 a.m., 7 a.m., and that what does noon mean? How many hours later would that be? And then what is the part of the water cycle? So it definitely flows in an order. So my students would simply number the steps of the water cycle off to the side. We would number all the way through the water cycle, starting with number 1, evaporation. Then we would do condensation, number 2, precipitation, number 3, and then runoff, number 4. And then we would draw an arrow back to number 1. And now I would attack the problem. Which table best describes the changes that occurred between 6 and noon? So this part of the story. So it starts right here with precipitation and what comes after precipitation. So precipitation happened at 7 a.m. So then let's see if we can read charts successfully. So then you just have to go in peace, and you notice that they made a mistake right here by getting something out of order, but they got close to the right answer, but the right answer was down here. So rigorous question, pretty easy to write, but a great combination of visuals and a chart. Now let's talk in closing just about error patterns. So you have to diagnose or drill down and figure out why your kids are missing questions. And this is the only way to do this is if you have information. If you're looking at a bubble answer or a check mark, you have no information. You don't know if they guessed it. You don't know if they're just randomly picking things, or you don't know if they actually know what they're talking about. So you're going to need them to annotate these questions, or annotate on a separate sheet of paper as they take a quiz and testing assessment. So whether it's formative or summative. So you need to determine, are they clueless? Are they just confused? Or are they confident? Or are they confident and careless? Did they go too fast? So all C's, right? And those C's are really going to give you a lot of information that will determine how you review. So don't review like all your kids are clueless, because they're not. You did a solid job of first teaching, I hope. But let's just say maybe you weren't on your game for part of it, or maybe you were rushed, or maybe we were out of the building and had to go remote. So I need to really check in with my kids to make sure they understand these concepts. So maybe you could determine that they're not clueless, but I have 50-50. I have half that are confused between rotation and revolution, or rotation and orbit. And then I have 50% that completely have nailed it. But out of that 50% that have nailed it, they're running too fast and they're making some simple mistakes. And you can determine that based on what they write on their supplemental paper or on their scratch paper as they take assessments, or what they write inside their journal entries on a journal prompt. Okay, now moving forward, EduSmart can very much help with whatever your data responsive instruction plan is. So just like someone spoke earlier about all the different assessment formats that are inside of EduSmart, you do have quizzes inside of EduSmart, but if you own StarSmart, you also have those STAR practice tests, reporting category tests, unit test, and then currently you have item analysis for the STAR practice test. And very, very soon, you will also have the item analysis for reporting and unit test available. But this helps every teacher be very data responsive. Now, how would I currently use EduSmart in a data responsive way? I would issue these reporting category tests or these StarSmart tests to really get a baseline on where my kids are. And then I would make customized learning plans for each subgroup of my kids, or a personalized learning plan for a specific scholar that's struggling with certain TEKs. Now, how would I do that? Well, I would follow my review plan, but when we go into the small group part of the review plan, or the reteach or review, everybody's review or reteach may be a little bit different. It may be customized based on their own learning needs. That's what EduSmart allows you to do, is customize and create your very own playlist for each group of kids, or each individual kid, or even maybe collectively for a class, if you have different classes that are trailing a little bit different on data. And so that is probably my second favorite thing about EduSmart. The favorite thing is that it's visually rich and aligned to the depth and complexity of the standard. I can get the job done with EduSmart, but EduSmart coupled with a high quality instructor means the highest level of performance for me. So the second reason I love EduSmart is its agileness with being able to customize a plan very quickly by putting things in students' queue in order to customize their own learning plan. And then it provides an enormous amount of data for me to relay that back to my team leads or to my administrative team. So here's an example of what a simple playlist could look like for a kiddo. It's not very intimidating at all. And you notice that you can create assignments, you can share inside of Canvas or in Google Classroom. So very, very creative, very, very wonderful product. Greatly, greatly love it. So Devanshi, that is it for the Whirlwind Star Prep Workshop. That was a lot. I don't think I breathed once. I just said Tom Jones. I took a big breath and I went for it. So
you were the queen of test prep info for that 50 minutes right there. Look at you go. On behalf of everyone who's attended and on behalf of EduSmart, thank you so much, Paula, for taking the time to speak with us today about all of these prep strategies that you shared with us today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't have any fancy music to play in the background, but it's playing in my head. It's just good music there. Thank you, everyone, for all of those who attended today. You will be getting a copy of all of the wonderful resources, strategies, and lesson plans that Paula shared with you mid next week. If you have any questions, I know we're at time, so I will wrap up, but we have a few people who can stay back to help answer your questions. But with that, I will go ahead and officially wrap us up. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, EduSmart. Thank you, all of you wonderful educators going above and beyond to help all of our students at this time. Hope you have a wonderful evening and enjoy your Thursday. Enjoy your Thursday. Bye, everybody.